Good morning. And I feel extra special because I've got my Pine Hollow t-shirt and my Primitive Archer hat on. Represent. Before I discuss this reduction process I'm going through on this hedge apple bow, or bow dark, I can't pronounce it in French, or Osage orange or Osage orange. I'm not going to get too trippy over here. I was even going to dazzle you with its scientific Latin name, but regardless, I want to back up. I have quite a few people that are watching me that have never made a bow, and you may think that gosh, I can't build bows because I don't have a shaving bench, I don't have a farrier's rasp, I don't have a bandsaw, which I don't have, or other expensive tools, accumulation of tools. It happens. I would like to first say that you don't need to have a lot of specialized tools for making bows. When I first started, I still have my Wonder tool, which is actually a former roofing axe. That this part was cut out, and then the hammer was curled into a hide scraper. This looks kind of adze-like, but I don't use this for a woodworking tool. I use this for scraping hides. And then it's actually beveled. It's flat on this side. The bevel is all on this side because I'm right-handed to act as a broad axe. And so when I was reducing those bows, I would draw my lines on it, and I would treat it, when I was getting close to my lines, almost like a broad axe, where I'm chopping this way to keep tear out at a minimum, and then using this almost like a draw knife. And this works, you know, as long as you're careful. Oh, it's raining a little bit. Oh well. When the wood is thick this way, then you risk tearing out a little bit more than when it's thin. And so I always approach it kind of like thin, 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 thin. So you're working it down in several planes at once. This was my draw knife, this Western Cutlery W84, which isn't the best steel, but you know, it's nostalgic. A handsaw, who doesn't have a handsaw? And this Nicholson rasp. Oh my gosh. Stickbow's comment reminded me of the good old days before the farrier's rasp, when I had one of these, which works, but it's incredibly slow, and I remember grinding away weeks and weeks and weeks, years to make a single bow, literally years. I'm just kidding. And so definitely farrier's rasp is something that you want to pick up. The bulk of the work was done by the hatchet and my knife. This was kept at a minimum. And so, I also want to clarify something. I didn't mention my method for working, I'll say Osage, why not? Osage can you see by the dawn's early light. My method of doing it, instead of pulling, I'll do this with the bark. If you gather hedge apple, you know, taking the bark off is a necessity as soon as you cut the tree, because you don't want bugs to get into it. And then you split it so it controls other splits when it's drying. A round thing, when it dries, will split. And so, best thing you want to do is split the thing into sections, take the bark off. Some people paint the ends with latex paint or put wax on it, what have you, polyurethane. I've never really done that because I cut them long, and the checking that appears on the ends isn't really much of an issue. But if you want to be thorough about it, by all means paint the ends of your staves to reduce checking, to kind of slow the drying down a little bit. When I mentioned pushing with a draw knife rather than pulling, when I'm taking the bark off, I'm a puller. But when I'm working it down to the growth rings, I'm a pusher. I just feel like I have more control. When you get near the end, you can't hold the bow on your shaving bench, so you have to get into pulling. However, I do prefer this method. I have more control, always have proper light so you can see the growth ring pattern on the back. Be very careful, so you're basically chipping away and getting down to that crunchy layer, and then approaching it like an airplane landing when you're scraping, whether you're scraping this way or this way, because you don't want to dig in and have like cuts. I was going to say vertical cuts. I guess that works. Vertical cuts in your wood. Careful, careful, careful. Another comment I had too, hello Phil, was as far as chasing growth rings, it always seems like it's going great, it's going great. When I approach here, I have to really be conscious of what's going on, because when I start making mistakes and go through the layer, it always happens around the handle area. I don't know, I guess overconfidence, what have you. In that respect, be willing to just step back and take a break, so then after you're fresh, you did a great job working your way down, especially on a longer bow, and you start kind of fading a little bit, just step back. Just step back. Continue tomorrow, so then, or the next day, so then this is your fresh area that you're just gonna like jam on. Everything's good. I do not, under any circumstances, and let me pull this little bad boy off of here, draw my lines on the back when it's still thick and work right down the lines. What I like to do is I'll draw lines, but they're going to be, as I say, a serving suggestion, a little thicker than you want. Even these lines, now that I'm working down here, will give me a wider bow. I find that I have more control, you know, and the chances of producing a bow are better if I'm conservative as far as drawing lines, working them down, and then fine-tuning it at each step. At first you have this big old giant block of wood. You may or may not be intimidated by it. It seems like a lot of wood to remove, but at every step it gets faster and faster and faster, and when it gets faster you risk, say, going in your lines and looking down here and saying, wow, my bow's wide here and it's thin in the middle. That's not a good thing. And so I always approach it conservative on the width and the thickness, and keep working it down. I have achieved the point of getting it close now using my Scribe-O-Matic, and I'll pull this close so you can see the line. This is definitely thicker than the finished bow, but I work it down a bit at a time. I'm not going to scribe it on this because it's crowned. This would give me a false reading. I'm not going to scribe it on this side until I work down to my semi-finished lines here, which I did. If you can see this, I've worked it down just to the outside of the line, and the angle is like this. You don't want to risk, I'm going to pull this rasp out of here. Look at this, I'm clever. I know that my head would be out of the shot and it would just be a body working this. You don't want to have it angled like this, or even try to go vertical. You risk then undercutting it. And so I always have a little angle on it when I'm working it with my rasp down to that line. This thing is in several stages. I've got it worked down, and as far as removing this stuff, it's relatively thin here because I just did the saw and the whacking out the chunks. So this rasp, farrier's rasp, will actually work it down to those lines really quick. On this side, where it's thicker, I might hit it with a draw knife, being very careful not to tear out like ripping fibers on the inside here and goofing it up. I'm going to be very conservative. This was a straight grain bow. It's going to be backed, and so I may have fibers that go in a little bit, but backing it will allow me to do that on Osage. If this was going to be an unbacked bow, a snaky bow, you definitely want to like carefully draw a knife around the edge to have that fiber consistent from tip to tip as much as possible, but I'm going to rely upon the straight grain and the backing so I can just draw the lines. multi-stage. The first stage, once I have chipped this out and got it to a manageable thickness, is then to redraw my lines a little wider than the finished bow, because I still want to have some playing room, because once it's thinned down, you could sand them to the lines. You're not removing a lot of wood, so you know, it's of no consequence really. So chipped it out, good, drew my lines, worked it to the lines using my rasp, and let me actually demonstrate that on this side, and I'm going to exaggerate it. So I've got this in my shaving bench, and picture the plane of the back. Let's say it's perfectly horizontal, so when I'm working with my rasp, do this way, I want to, exaggerating it, move it this way, so as you go deeper it gets thicker, and then I don't risk having like a thin spot as I'm looking at the face. And so it's just, let me put it in a peg hole, keep it because I'm putting pressure on the side. Working it down like that. And that actually, in that little span of time, you can see remove quite a bit of wood. Once I get it to the line, look at this. I've got it to the line, pretty consistent. I'm going to take this, and you may ask, what do I set this for? I don't want to sit on that. That would make for a bad day. Then I'm going to do it for a little greater than a ½ an inch. That's the magic number. Went back, scribed it, a little greater than a ½ an inch. And then using the rasp, and why a ½ an inch? That just gives me some buffer zone. When I get to the middle though, I'm not going to work it down that much. I'm going to go above my line so it's greater than a ½ an inch. Once I scribe, hey, this video is almost organized. It must not have been designed by me. I am going to exaggerate while I'm doing it again. The back is over here. I shall take the farrier's rasp again and exaggerating it, work this down at an angle. I am not trying to get a flat belly on this, but I want to get an angle. And even though you might have wiggles on here, and this is a wide surface, with proper technique, this can, using this leading edge, this can go around snakes. It's not strictly just for working straight lines. And how I find, instead of just going up and down like this, I'm going to move it like this because it gives me a better advantage for working a straight line if I'm moving it towards me. Let me get this into your view so you can see it. And so, in that stage, if you can see this, I'm going to rotate, I have no clue. I have a peak. Angle off to the side, angle off to the side. This also helps with tear out, reducing tear out. I've got a peak that runs along here. Once, and I usually work the whole bow instead of just sections. I did this for your benefit. Then I can go back, and you see this, how this is flat? This works really fast, even though it's Osage, or black locust, which is a really hard wood. Getting that peak off works really fast. And back to the bench. Getting the peak off. Getting my peak off. Just flattening it off in good light. Now this is like utilizing a topographic map. Because what you want to start seeing is, you can see it right here, there is a growth ring right here, and on the side another one. And so we are reading a topographic map here. I want to get, because this is straight, if you have like a wobbly wood with different, undulations it may not work this way, but generally on a straight piece of wood, straight grain piece of wood, straight wood, you are going to have, as you work your way this way, if the bow is thicker, the best thing would be to have like everything even Steven on the bottom edge. And you can almost get these things tillered if you're watching it, because you want to have, and I will do this, picture growth rings on the back, just layers. A growth ring near the center of the handle, a growth ring going out a little bit, and then a relatively quick jump to another one, and then a longer jump to one, and then another jump and another jump. And so you can actually tiller these things without a string, as long as it's a consistent piece of wood, by just looking at the growth ring patterns. So at the center, if I have growth ring, stop, even stop here, another one pretty close, about the same distance, another growth ring, keeping those V's centered down the limb, you can almost pull these things off as long as you have the thickness right in the center, tillered, more or less tillered right off the start. I would not suggest that, you know, unless you're really familiar with working the wood and really familiar with the length and the type of wood and the width. It's kind of a fun little guessing game. And so, necessary tool. In response to Larry, gosh, I was looking at this thing, you wondered what kind it was. There's no marks on this. This could be from the late 1800s. I'm not sure. It came out of a set of antique tools. Hard to say. Necessary for, yeah, pick one up. You can buy them used on eBay, and sometimes old tools have higher quality steel than the new modern ones. Not always. Farrier's rasp. You must have a razor sharp hatchet, and if you want to go a step farther, re-bevel it so it's flat on one side and then the bevel is all on whatever hand you are, because that helps it dig in at a shallower angle. If you don't have a bench and you don't have a Jorgensen to put on your bench, what I did in the past, you see behind me, there's a fence rail. I used to just tie it on with rope to a fence rail. You can make bows without actually even lashing them to a fence rail or using a bench, just doing it by hand. Just with the hatchet, a knife for scraping. You don't even need a rasp. Some questions. Hello, Tim. You were wondering where this came from. Was it a Michigan tree? This actually came from Kentucky, but there's the hedge apple in Michigan too. I'm sure people use it. As far as that goes, there was another question regarding what time of year to gather. I've heard some people say one time a year is better than others. However, I'm opportunistic and I've gathered staves year-round, spring, summer, winter, and fall. I actually like spring because if you're using whitewoods, like elm or maple or oak, in the spring you can just peel the bark off and you're ready. You've got a back right there and there's no scraping or anything. It just comes off clean. Oh, if you gather in a time of year when that bark just doesn't peel off easy, what I've found is I'll carefully scrape it off. I won't use a draw knife. I'll use just my drop point knife. And you have the little flakes of inner bark on there. If you want to remove those, just put it over a steam kettle. Let that get hot and moist, and then you can just flake that inner bark off with your fingernails without damaging the back. What else? There was another question regarding what if there's a split in the tip? What if whatever, it was gathered, it was cut, it was dried, and you didn't trim the ends off to get the checks. If there's like a split that runs down here, I'm actually going to draw it on simulation. This is a crack. As long as it's down the center of the bow, and they usually just run straight through here, and it doesn't interfere with the string grooves, what have you, you can put a wrap of sinew around it. But generally speaking, there's not a whole lot of stressy situations going on at the tips. And that's evident because the tips are really narrow. And if you look at it when you're tillering it, there's a certain distance where they're not even bending. There's a lot of leverage on the tips. And so you can survive a split running down it. It can look kind of ugly, but from a structural standpoint, it's not necessarily a deal breaker. You can fix that with a sinew wrap. Once it's dried, it's not going to have a tendency to continue splitting. So it's up to you whether or not you want to live with like a little split on the end. What are some other questions? Talked about, I push rather than pull. Talked about splitting. I think that's actually about it. Getting ready for another day. Poor John is like kind of tired. See, my freedom to just kind of hang out and do whatever comes at night. And so I stayed up a little too late last night, watched another really good monster movie. Love monster movies. And then a few episodes of the 70s show. Got it. That's a wrap. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for watching. Appreciate that. You know, if you're in Michigan, stop by. This is a public place, so I'm not necessarily too afraid of people stopping in. And you live in West Branch. There's no excuse. That's like not far at all. That's local. It's local. And to all of those who are suffering in Houston, man, my thoughts are with you. That's got to be miserable. Hang in there. You know, not to be too cliche, but tough times don't last, but tough people do. Okay, that's a wrap. I'm done. I'm done yapping. You're free. You're free to go off and gather wood, make bows. Lots of bows. Today is fun day. I get to pack up a couple bows. Oh, last trivia. I can't stop. You know, this is John's social hour. Talking about myself in the third person or second. I don't know. It wasn't an English major. Is that one of the bows had a medicine wheel on it. She has north, south, east, and west. And the three bows, the three paddle bows, one is going to New York, east. One is going, I believe, to Texas, south. The other one's going to Utah, west. I should have made 4. The fourth one would have gone to Manitoba. It would have truly been a medicine wheel day.